Thank you very much. Does it work if I just stand here or not? Yeah, it does. Kia ora tātou, te mana o te tangata whenua, Ngāti Whātua, tēnā koe. Belich, greetings to you all. It's a great feeling to listen to what we've just heard as a kind of, shall we say, clumsy pioneer in the field. We've heard some painful stories, and it's not easy to sit or stand as a Pākehā and just face the fact that these are true. There have been attempts in the past to let ourselves off the hook. I remember my friend Keith Sinclair running with one in one of his later books, where he says, well, actually, it's not really the Pākehā, it's the British, it's the imperial troops. And there's some truth in that, in the sense that the bulk of the manpower and the bulk of the money and the bulk of the technology was levered out of London by people of the likes of George Grey. But on the whole, the colonial troops were pretty important too. The Waikato militia, or military settlers, the Colonial Defence Force, of which Colonel Nixon, who we've just heard a bit about, the Armed Constabulary, the Forest Rangers, these guys were in it too. Now, of course, Dalmatian New Zealanders, Ngāti Tarara, had not yet arrived. So maybe we are off the hook. Maybe, but maybe not. The subsequent immigrants to New Zealand, even though their ancestors weren't even here yet, still benefited to some extent from the separation of Māori from their resource base. So, it's hard history, but as a Oxford professor, what we've just heard is precisely accurate. And the resonance of the kind of living pain came through to me first when I was touring the various marae at which we filmed for the television series in 1997. And what came through there, especially at Oraka, where we had Whiramako Black with us, who did the music, and she brought in a lot of the wāta element and what we've just heard, wonderful stuff from Arene. And the meeting between her and, she was she was Tuhoi. And the meeting between her and the Orakau people was just amazing. It was living history. It was still alive for them. There was no question about it. We had the same thing at Pokaikai. We've heard about Rangiofia, and it is, basically it's a fact. There are a few contestable details, but there was killing of civilians, unnecessary killing of Māori civilians at Rangiofia, at Orakau, and at Pokaikai and Taranaki. Hard facts. One thing that maybe, there's a wonderful account there from Vincent O'Malley, who's taken over the torch very effectively. I'd like to say I taught him everything he knew, but it wouldn't quite be true. But there's one thing I might take issue with, and that is the notion that I think it's true that we have prioritised World Wars I and II over the Waikato War much more than we should have done. But that shouldn't go into a context where we actually denigrate the scars from those two wars either. World War I in particular, as I'll be talking more about this evening, was hugely damaging for New Zealand in ways that we still haven't fully explored, to be honest. There's 60,000 skeletons in the closet still. That's the number of casualties we suffered. There was talk after the television series of the New Zealand Wars that we should do a documentary series on New Zealand in World War One. And I was approached about it, and I actually even thought of the first lines. This is what you would have heard in the first episode. Like many of you, my grandfather and my great-grandfather fought through this terrible Great War. Unfortunately, they were on the other side. They were conscripted into the Austro-Hungarian Navy before they came out to New Zealand. And this raises an issue that I think we need to face up to, frankly, if we're laying our cards on the table. And that is that, first, some Māori fought on the other side in the New Zealand Wars. How are we to handle this as we teach our history to our children? How are we to handle this as we look at place-based history? What if we are in places where Māori were fighting Māori on the side of government troops? We know this happened. There's absolutely no question about it. Are we just going to turn it into another toxic silence? How do we handle it? What do we even call these people? Kupapa used to be the term, but I have Māori friends who say that's like a stake through the heart. It's like quisling. Kāwanatanga Māori is another term used at the time. Kingites and Queenites. Kāwanatanga Māori doesn't sound quite right. I mean, these people were fighting, these iwi were fighting for what in their terms was their people. And that's an issue that we need to try to struggle to understand. I don't think we can just leave it under the carpet and hope it will go away, because it's likely to come back and bite us if we do that. We've been through this process before. This raises another interesting issue, I think, which is also worth considering and is also painful for some. The treaty process is a relationship between the so-called Crown, which in effect has been inherited by the Pākehā state, and particular iwi, particular Māori tribes. During the war process, as a part of mobilising Māori against colonisation, some Māori questioned the preeminence of the tribe. One could argue that Kingitanga did it at the time before it sort of retreated back into tainuiness in a sense, but at first it was, I think I once calculated that 2/3 of the iwi of the North Island provided some kind of support to Kingitanga during the Waikato War. Not necessarily soldiers, but often ammunition and guns. Then of course there was Paimarere, Tua Haumene, think not of your own village, think of the whole island. And Ringatu and Te Tukawaru's movements, and later into the 20th century, the Ratana Church. How are we to think of these? One could call these, and my friend and colleague Aroha Harris has said something rather similar. We've got to leave room for a sort of pan-tribal Māori identities and not try to write them out of our history. While we may recognise the primacy of iwitanga, we cannot wholly forget Māoritanga generated by Māori, not some colonialist scam. So I guess my plea is that we learn not only the lessons of the past, but the lessons of not learning the lessons of the past, and try to find space for these dimensions of Māori history, I guess, and bear in mind that it was it's Māori who are asking us to in the past. So if we leave these scars alone, will they fester? And I think I'll leave it there. Kia ora tātou.